I just want to introduce her, and she is a Congresswoman Lujan Grisham of New Mexico's 1st District, and we want to thank her for joining us today. She's serving in her 2nd term in the House. The Congresswoman currently serves on the House Committees on the Budget, Agriculture, and Oversight and Government Reform. Before coming to Capitol Hill, she headed the New Mexico Department of Health, where I first met her. She was actually, I first met you when you were on the Aging, Department of Aging. When I was working for Senator Bingham, and we worked very closely together, and I consider her a dear friend. She led the fight to ban the sale of junk food in schools and pushed to ensure every child in the state had access to primary health care. This spring, Congresswoman Lujan Grisham reintroduced the Health Equity and Access Under the Law for Immigrant Women and Families Act, which is the acronym for that is HEAL. We are pleased, First Focus Campaign for Children, to support the HEAL Act, which restore access to affordable health care and care for immigrant children and pregnant women authorized to live and work in the United States. I just want to thank her for being here today, and has always been a great champion for kids, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. So thank you for coming.
I barely need to, this is good, because usually I can't see over the podiums, and then I always forget to bring something to stand on. So it's clear that Bruce is demonstrating his relationship with me, because he knows that I need this. And I really blame him, although you're very fortunate in this organization to have him in a leadership role, because I would call him 20 times a day. Explain Medicaid to me one more time, all right? Because I don't think it's working in the way that it is supposed to. And it seems to me that these applications and our efforts to reach needy families and kids should be much easier. And I hold you, Bruce, personally responsible if we can't make that happen in the state, in the country. And just as I get to Congress, so I'm really fighting to get there. He's, of course, working his way out in the private sector. And so I'm very disappointed in that. But I will tell you that we do have great mutual admiration. And there is something incredible about being in these roles as an advocate. So I'm going to be shameless and do 3 quick things. One, I do want to focus a bit on recognizing you for the value of your work. I don't think members of Congress do that enough, and I'll tell you why, besides the obvious. I want to do that. 2, I want to shamelessly tell you about another bill that you should be so excited about, like the HEAL Act, called CareCorps. And then 3, really maybe re-energize all of us to coordinate our efforts in a new and heightened way as we see more and more children of color and more families of color falling into the traps of poverty with no real way out, and without the right investments or supports. We are definitely in this country going in the wrong direction, and we know how to do better. Now we just need to execute that doing better. So I want to talk about that. So first, you make an incredible difference. And while I teased Bruce a little about calling about how does Medicaid work, I was one of those young, I was 34 when I got appointed to the Agency on Aging. I was a lawyer, and I was practicing law, sort of, if you use that term loosely. I was really an advocate, and I was learning about aging issues and about Social Security and limited access to health care and no access to long-term care. And the fact that in New Mexico, 30 years ago, we were one of the leading states for grandparents raising grandchildren. And I'd love to tell you that that dynamic has diminished because we're keeping families together in a more productive way, or that if it's more appropriate and more beneficial to that family unit for grandparents to be raising grandchildren, I'd like to tell you today that we've invested incredible resources from early education and pre-K and healthcare supports all the way to opportunities in higher education, and making sure that those families are stable in terms of both being financially stable and really seeing clearly and in a focused manner the opportunities before them. But you would know that that's not true. And so 30 years later, knowing what I knew then, I'd like to tell you that we've made such great progress. So again, here's my thank you. I was 34, got appointed, had great advocacy support. And in many of my terms as an appointee through aging and in the Department of Health, it was this organization and organizations just like you with advocates, young men and women who make less, who carry the burdens of these individual issues of the families that you represent and get to know in this process, home with you every day while you're caring for your own families, waiting for policymakers to do the right thing, because the evidence, even if it wasn't our moral imperative to support kids and their families, we know that every dollar invested returns to us so much more in the economic security and fabric of our communities and society. And yet, we continue to see cuts because kids don't have a great voice. And without you, there would be no voice at all. And I think we're now to the second part, kind of a renewed effort where we're expanding bipartisan in Congress to think about ways that we're supporting kids in any number of ways, which is why I want to talk to you a little bit about a bill called CareCore. My mother lives with me, so not only do I have my aging advocacy and experience is sort of the core of who I am. I live it every day still, and I'm honored to do that. And I tell people all the time that I'm lucky that I have an opportunity where my mother can live with me and we can take care of each other. And the truth of the matter is this: my mother would rather have a hot poker in her eye than live with me, all right? And the feeling is mutual, because that mother-daughter relationship never changes. I'm a widow, so I'm single. So when I come home after 11:30 at night, my mother can see me across the patio and shakes her finger at me to remind me that I'm about 30 minutes from my curfew. Really? I'm 56, all right? 56 years old. She's bossing me. She doesn't like my clothing choices, my high heels, and she certainly doesn't like the way I wear my hair. All right? So that never changes, ladies. Never. But my mom requires considerable amounts of care and support with a focus on her independence. And to do that, and to be in this job, I do with the support of both paid and unpaid individuals and family members. I spend on average 20 hours a week trying to navigate private and public systems that are intended to invest in her well-being. And of course, she paid for those programs and services. And she raised a disabled child. She did a great job. She weighed in special education. She was a terrific advocate in her own right. It's time that we give back. And here's what I recognize. My 28-year-old daughter is impacted because when I'm here, who's responsible for my mom? My 28-year-old daughter. Now, she's doesn't have a family of her own, but let's talk about the real demographics in this country. Most 28-year-olds do, and they're caring for their parents and their in-laws and their children. And we're creating this caregiving dynamic that hurts women, that causes financial insecurity with women, that is increasing poverty levels among families. That means increasing poverty and tensions with children. And those dynamics are burgeoning with no real platform. And it's the same debate that you're aware of, that Medicaid is tapped. And Medicare is tapped. So these are not places to go. So Congress finds himself in this trap where we debate all day long entitlement reform, and the only part of that debate that you ever see is where some of us say more and some of us say less. But we aren't creative about ways to leverage those resources and to leverage your expertise to make sure that we have sound investments that save money but also save lives and improve the quality of life and the opportunities for those families that we serve. So CareCore. CareCore is an idea. We create a national service program. We encourage young people to be direct caregivers, not to compete with paid caregivers, to do what we call instruments of activities of daily living. It's really about being a companion. You know what it would mean to me if I knew that I had a young person dedicated to getting to know my mom who could drive her to a doctor's appointment while I'm here or I'm at work? What it would mean to my daughter who has to take off work when we need that because she has no other option? And then we would create a brand new non-intergenerational competition, but a real unique understanding about what we need and how we can accomplish those things together. And it will shore up those investments in long-term care that we don't have now. And just like the Peace Corps, we're going to provide housing and stipends, education and support. You give us 2 years, we're going to put you in school. You want to study healthcare, we'll pay for 4 years of school and create a brand new dynamic that's really focused on the health and quality of life for American families, which is what you guys do each and every day. And so I'm going to encourage you to take a look at that bill and see how it translates, and think about all those grandparents that need those investments who, as I said before, are in fact raising their grandchildren. Now the last part, all that work that we have to do. Bruce helped New Mexico create a thing called the Children's Cabinet that Governor Richardson, when I was the Secretary of Health, created, because he recognized that while we might independently, all within our own bureaucratic backyards, maybe we were thinking that we were doing the very best with the limited resources we have, but we often identify quicker than the benefits the barriers of working together. He created the Children's Cabinet along with the Lieutenant Governor, a woman named Diane Dennis. And in that Children's Cabinet, we had one job. Every department had to, A, identify the resources that they could leverage, and then they had to commit to figuring out a way to leverage them. We lobbied as a body, as a Children's Cabinet. We received resources as a group, the Children's Cabinet, and we, for the first time in New Mexico, worked on universal pre-K and universal kindergarten. Now, we've rolled that back in the recent administrations, but we would never have gotten that far in New Mexico without that Children's Cabinet. So I think about this. More than the caucuses that we have, which are important and valuable in Congress, what about a bicameral, bipartisan call to action, a war on poverty that really focuses about making children the #1 priority, recognizing the impact that we have on American families, where every member agrees to look at every one of their pieces of legislation and their priorities and what's going on in their states and find ways to leverage our efforts both federally and locally, because like you, and I'll bring it full circle, if we act as advocates, there is no dearth to the opportunities and ideas that we can put forward, because I have a responsibility to do something about a state that now has the hungriest children in the country. And I'm working in a political environment where we want to cut food stamps and cause work requirements for 18 and 19-year-old moms who may not have the experience, and in a state that has the worst economic recovery since the 2008 recession in the country. There aren't any jobs for those 18, 19-year-olds, and what do you know? That even if they got a job and they were making $200 more than those benefits would allow, they would lose $600 in housing and child care credits. So we punish them for trying to support their families in a productive way. And I also challenge all of the members, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, largely Republican members who represent states like I do that have fallen further behind in education and social supports than any of the states. And what if we have a state focus on those that need us most and get those members, bipartisan, bicameral, to agree that we'll launch this federal Children's Cabinet in a way that could reach tangible results. So thank you for inspiring me, and thank you for doing the work that you do, and thank you for recognizing that 8% of the federal budget is shameful in terms of what we invest in children and the future of this country. And I'm certainly here to work diligently every day to do something about that. Thank you. Okay, and thanks you guys.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, Congresswoman, so much. And what we will do is we'll move back to, but thank you for all your work on behalf of kids over the years in both the state and now here. So we all look forward to working with you on this, your new idea too. And we will check into your other bill. We'll